At 84, Linda Gray has finally spoken about the behind-the-scenes memories of Dallas that she had always kept to herself. This time, she's not talking about glamour, nor reminiscing about past glory, but about 5 faces that once filled her heart with feelings hard to describe. Not to blame, nor to stir up noise, just a quiet confession, a late truth. And perhaps it is this very honesty that makes her story touch the hearts of those who listen. Larry Hagman, the name Linda Gray could never forget in Dallas. Yet every time she signed a new season's contract, she couldn't help but wonder, will I ever be seen as a true partner, or will I always be the shadow behind him? Ironically, audiences adored the JR-Sue Ellen pairing. They loved the fiery yet magnetic chemistry, the element that set Dallas apart. Linda couldn't deny that it was Larry who gave Sue Ellen her fire. By pushing her character into dark corners, he forced her to fight back. Their on-screen tension became one of television's most iconic duos. Linda once said with a bittersweet smile, "GR tormented Sue Ellen, and Larry left me heartbroken more than once. But maybe that's why together we created something unforgettable." Throughout Dallas, Linda never publicly criticized Larry. She kept her image gracious and professional, understanding that fans cherished the entire cast, not just one actor. But in quiet moments with close friends, she admitted, "He never really saw me as an equal partner. To him, I was just a piece that completed his picture." The words were soft, but they carried years of unspoken weight. Linda never denied that without Larry, Sue Ellen wouldn't have been as richly drawn. She was grateful for his talent, and for the years they built something extraordinary together. Yet she also wanted people to understand. Sometimes the brilliance of one star can make those around them struggle just to remain visible. And for years, she lived that silent struggle. So when Linda Gray names Larry Hagman among the 5 most difficult people in her career, it isn't revenge. It's simply her way of closing a long chapter of quiet endurance, a way of acknowledging that, despite the sacrifices, her voice and her contribution to Dallas still deserve to be heard. For millions of viewers around the world, Larry Hagman will forever be J.R. Ewing, the iconic television character of the 1,980 seconds. He was cunning, manipulative, and yet irresistibly charismatic, turning Dallas into a global phenomenon. To fans, Larry was an irreplaceable star, a man who transformed villainy into an art form and scheming into captivating entertainment. But for Linda Gray, who spent years by his side as Sue Ellen, his presence was both a gift and a quiet shadow that lingered throughout her career. What Linda remembers most about Larry wasn't just his talent, but the way he dominated everyone around him. On screen, he would step into a frame and instantly light up the room. Off camera, that same brilliance could feel overwhelming, casting a shadow over those standing near. Linda once admitted that whenever Larry was on set, she felt she had to work twice as hard just to avoid fading into the background. "He was like a spotlight shining straight into your eyes," she recalled, "so bright that it made it hard to see your own path." The most frustrating part for Linda wasn't that Larry was rude or unkind. Quite the opposite, he kept the atmosphere both fun and professional. He told jokes, shared stories, and made the crew laugh, like a friendly big brother. Yet behind the laughter, Linda often sensed a subtle dismissal, as if her efforts were just added seasoning to his grand performance. He didn't have to say a word. A raised eyebrow or a fleeting glance was enough for her to know her input wasn't truly valued. One memory she could never shake was a pivotal scene between Sue Ellen and JR, a moment when her character was meant to rise up, no longer the submissive wife. Linda had prepared for days, working through every line and expression. But when the cameras rolled, Larry unexpectedly ad-libbed a few lines, turning the tense confrontation into something laced with sarcasm. Viewers later praised the scene for JR's sharpness, but Linda was stunned. "He stole the moment I had been waiting for," she later confided. Of course, she never complained publicly. She knew it was Larry's instinct, always putting himself at the center, and that Dallas needed that to keep its spark. Still, she couldn't help but feel a part of her own value had been swallowed up. Larry also had a habit of quietly directing. During script meetings, he would offer suggestions that sounded friendly but carried weight. "Linda, why don't you tone it down a bit? Don't go too heavy, so I can build the scene," he once told her. It sounded reasonable, but Linda knew what it really meant. Her character had to step back so Jur could shine. Over the years, she learned to accept it because Dallas was JR, and JR was Larry Hagman. Ken Kercheval. The rivalry that left Linda Gray both grateful and exhausted. Afterward, the director just shook his head, while Linda understood the truth. For Ken, advice was optional. His instincts always came first, even if it meant overshadowing others. And yet, Linda couldn't deny that this rivalry made her stronger. Ken forced her to stay sharp, never to let her guard down. Every time they shared the screen, she had to give her all to avoid being outshined. That pressure transformed Sue Ellen into a tougher, more complex character, far from the fragile wife she started as. "Maybe without Ken, I would never have dug so deeply into Sue Ellen's resilience," she admitted. It was the paradox of their relationship. Exhausting, yet strangely invaluable. Still, gratitude didn't erase the quiet fatigue. Linda often felt as though she was trapped in an endless race, with Ken as the tireless competitor. On long shooting days, just catching his calculating glance could weigh her down. Not because she feared him, but because she was tired of constantly having to prove herself. "I just wanted to work in trust, not in perpetual competition," she once confided to a close friend. Off-screen, Ken wasn't unkind. He was polite, gracious, even warm, always ready, with a hug at the end of a long shoot. But even in those moments, Linda sensed a silent calculation in his eyes. Who stood out more? Who commanded the audience's gaze? She knew he never meant harm, yet his presence carried an unshakable pressure. At 84, looking back on Dallas, Linda doesn't hesitate to name Ken Kercheval among the 5 colleagues who wore her down the most. She never denied his talent or his contribution. Dallas would not have been complete without Cliff Barnes. But she also wanted to be honest. Sometimes, constant rivalry drains you more than open conflict ever could. To Linda, Ken was not a villain, but an invisible adversary who left her both thankful and weary. That's why when she speaks of Ken, she uses 2 words, exhausting and grateful. A strange mixture, but one that defines a whole chapter of her career. And by naming Ken Kercheval, she isn't diminishing him, she's simply acknowledging that even longtime companions can leave lasting marks, not through cruelty, but through relentless competition. If Larry Hagman was the blinding spotlight that overshadowed others, then Ken Kercheval was like a mirror, reflecting every move, making Linda Gray feel constantly scrutinized and trapped in an unwanted rivalry. For Dallas audiences, Ken was Cliff Barnes, J.R. Ewing's eternal nemesis. He stood for justice, yet carried his own schemes. A layered character seen as the only one bold enough to stand toe-to-toe with J.R. Fans admired Cliff's persistence, his refusal to bow to the Ewing empire. But for Linda, working with Ken was far from easy, not because he was cruel, but because of the relentless competition she endured for years. From the earliest seasons, Linda noticed one thing: Ken never accepted being second. No matter how big or small a scene, he found a way to make Cliff stand out. In theory, it was a strength proof of his commitment and seriousness. But backstage, it created tension. Whenever Linda prepared for a scene as Sue Ellen, Ken would arrive with an energy that felt like a challenge, as if to prove that he held the key to the audience's emotions. He always pushed everyone around him to play at their very best, because if you didn't, he'd leave you behind, Linda recalled. What frustrated Linda most was Ken's habit of comparing. He would bluntly ask, "How many close-ups did you get in that scene?" "I had 7. He said it with a smile, but the calculation was clear. Linda, who valued subtlety and grace, felt weary of such constant one-upmanship. She never saw acting as a competition, but Ken did. To him, Dallas was a battlefield, where every actor fought for screen time to etch their name into television history. Once, during a script meeting, Linda suggested that Sue Ellen should have deeper inner conflicts beyond her troubled marriage. Ken immediately interjected, "But if Sue Ellen gets that, Cliff loses his counterbalance." He didn't say it to belittle her, but to protect his own character's standing. For Linda, it was a harsh realization. To Ken, everything was a matter of power balance. Someone always had to sacrifice so Cliff Barnes could stay in the spotlight. "I had never worked with someone who treated scripts like a political chessboard," she sighed. Ken was also famously stubborn. Once he made a choice, it was almost impossible to sway him. A director once asked him to tone down his performance in a scene so Sue Ellen could hold the focus. Ken smiled politely, but once the cameras rolled, he gave the scene everything he had, nearly stealing the audience's attention. Victoria Principle, the invisible distance that left Linda Gray wistful. Perhaps, Linda reflected, keeping her distance was Victoria's way of protecting herself. She joined Dallas young, carrying high expectations, aware of how harsh the television world could be. The coldness might have been her armor against potential wounds, but for Linda, that armor turned every attempt at connection into a dead end. "Sometimes I just wished she would let me see a little weakness, a little fatigue. We were both women, both under pressure, but she never let it show," Linda said. At cast parties, Victoria often slipped away early, leaving no trace. Linda, with a glass of wine in hand, would feel the absence. "When the whole group was singing, laughing, I always noticed one face missing, and that was Victoria. She was there, but never really with us," she said. Over time, Linda learned to accept it. She stopped expecting friendship and came to see Victoria simply as an excellent colleague, an essential part of Dallas. Yet the disappointment lingered. "We made television history together, but looking back, I can't call her a close friend, and that makes me sadder than I thought it would," she confessed. Linda understood the audience's love for Pamela, for Victoria, and she admired her too. But on a personal level, she had to admit, working with someone too distant, too guarded, could be more draining than working with someone loud or difficult. At least with noise, you feel presence. But with invisible distance, all you feel is yourself standing quietly in front of a wall that never opens. Among the women of Dallas, Victoria Principal was always the radiant star. With her graceful beauty, thick dark hair, and piercing eyes, she quickly became the quintessential television darling of the 1,980 seconds. Audiences adored Pamela Barnes, not only for her looks, but for her intelligence, pride, and compassionate heart. On screen, Pamela was the modern woman, bold in love, unafraid to fight for happiness. But for Linda Gray, who spent hundreds of days on set alongside her, Victoria left a different impression, an invisible distance, like a sheet of glass quietly separating the two of them. Linda never denied Victoria's talent or dedication. She was one of the most professional colleagues Linda had ever worked with, always punctual, thoroughly prepared, and immaculately put together from wardrobe to demeanor. Yet that very perfection sometimes felt like a protective shell, impossible to penetrate. She was like a beautiful statue in a museum. Everyone admired her, but no one could ever really touch her, Linda once said. On set, Linda often tried to connect, sharing stories about family, children, or everyday worries. Victoria would smile politely, answer briefly, then quickly return to her script or notes. She wasn't rude, she wasn't cold in any obvious way, but she rarely gave the warmth of friendship. For Linda, that left a quiet void. "I didn't need hours of late-night confessions, but at least an understanding look, a genuine moment of sharing." With Victoria, that almost never came. Linda remembered one emotional scene between Sue Ellen and Pamela. When the director yelled, "Cut," she wrapped her arms around Victoria, hoping to hold onto the bond they had just created on screen. But Victoria responded with a quick, tidy hug, then swiftly walked off, her composure restored as if no moment of vulnerability had just passed. Linda stood frozen for a few seconds, stunned. That hug felt like a door opening, only to slam shut right away, she later recalled. Victoria was also known for her restraint backstage. While the other actors joked and laughed to shake off tension, she stayed firmly in work mode. It gave her a dignified air, but also an atmosphere of seriousness that sometimes weighed on others. For Linda, who thrived on connection, it was suffocating. In a cast where empathy was what fueled our performances, she built a circle around herself that no one was allowed to step into, Linda said. What hurt Linda most was the sense that Victoria never truly saw her as a friend. In one joint interview, a reporter asked them about their most memorable moment together. Linda laughed as she recalled the time they filmed in pouring rain, clothes drenched, the whole crew joking to stay warm. When it was Victoria's turn, she simply spoke of the professionalism of the team and the honor of working in such an environment. Not a word about Linda, though she was sitting right beside her. The answer wasn't unkind, but it cut Linda all the same. Steve Cannelly. So gentle he became almost invisible to Linda Gray. She remembered his kind smile, his firm handshake, his undeniable decency. But she also remembered the hollowness after their shared scenes, the sensation of speaking to someone who listened but never truly answered with his heart. Dallas needed Steve Cannelly. Ray Krebs was a crucial part of its legacy. But in Linda's personal truth, his presence was too faint, too muted. And sometimes, she admitted, being surrounded by such quietness could leave deeper scars than open conflict. In Dallas, Steve Cannelly played Ray Krebs, the rugged cowboy, whose quiet sincerity embodied the spirit of the American West. For viewers, Ray represented honesty and simplicity in a world otherwise dominated by the Ewing's power games and schemes. He was the heart of the ranch, the good man standing apart from greed and manipulation. But for Linda Gray, who often shared scenes with Steve, her feelings were mixed, a deep respect shadowed by disappointment. Unlike Larry or Ken, Steve never tried to dominate or compete. He was so gentle that, at times, it felt like he disappeared. On set, Linda often saw him sitting quietly in a corner, reading his script, rarely speaking up. When someone cracked a joke, he would smile politely, but seldom join in. To many, this calmness was admirable. But to Linda, it created a void, leaving her without a true partner in performance. One memory stayed with her. A scene between Sue Ellen and Ray, filled with emotional weight. Linda poured her heart into it, searching for fire in Steve's eyes to lift her higher. Instead, she found only his soft, kind expression, gentle, steady, but never igniting. I threw my whole heart into that moment, Linda recalled. But he caught it as if with a thin handkerchief, and then it was gone, without leaving a mark. Steve was not unprofessional. He knew his lines, always arrived on time, and respected his castmates. But that very safety, his refusal to push boundaries, frustrated Linda. Acting, for her, was a soul-to-soul dialogue. It required challenge, friction, sparks. With Steve, there was none. He was like a soft wall, she once said. You could lean on it, but it never pushed back. What troubled Linda most was his blending in. While others carved sharp identities, Larry with his dominance, Ken with his competitiveness, Victoria with her reserve, Steve left little behind. At rap parties, he sat in the back, spoke gently with a few friends, then slipped away unnoticed. Watching him go, Linda often wondered, did he ever truly feel part of us? Even when directors encouraged Steve to dig deeper, to bring more psychological nuance to Ray, he remained steadfast in his quiet restraint. Linda felt both sympathy and sympathy for his shy nature. Frustration because his hesitance dragged her into dull waters. I longed for him to explode, just once, she admitted, to give me something raw to hold on to. But it never came. Audiences adored Ray precisely because of that mildness. To them, he was the last decent man in Dallas. Linda respected that love, yet privately, she felt let down. He was too safe, too calm, she confessed. And in that calmness, I felt my own fire being wasted. At 84, when Linda finally placed Steve Cannelly among the 5 colleagues who left her unsettled, it was not out of resentment. it was honesty. Not all frustrations come from conflict. Some are born of absence. The absence of challenge, of connection, of that vital spark that keeps an actor alive in a scene. Steve, to her, embodied that absence. Patrick Duffy, the too-perfect hero who left Linda Gray feeling compared. In interviews, reporters often asked Linda about Larry or Patrick. With Larry, they probed into the mischief and behind-the-scenes drama. With Patrick, it was always admiration, the nicest man on set, the perfect gentleman. Linda smiled, nodded, but inside, she felt a hollow ache. What about me? I gave everything my youth, my energy, but in the end, people only remembered Bobby Ewing, the flawless golden boy. Patrick's perfection wasn't just on screen, it extended into his real life. Unlike many Hollywood actors, he sustained a decades-long marriage, faithful to one woman until her passing. Their love story was celebrated everywhere. Once again, Linda felt the sting of comparison. While her own marriages faltered and her private life bore scars, Patrick stood unshaken, a monument to stability and devotion. He made me see my own flaws more clearly, Linda admitted. Every time I looked at him, I felt like I was failing in the eyes of the world. She once asked Patrick directly, "How do you stay so positive all the time? Haven't you ever felt exhausted, like giving up?" Patrick only smiled and said, "Of course I have, but I never let myself stay in the dark for too long. I choose the light." His words sounded simple, but to Linda, who had spent her career embodying a woman drowning in darkness, it cut deep. To her, Patrick Duffy was a paradox. Too good, too flawless, so much so that he left those around him feeling inadequate. He had no faults, but it was precisely that lack of fault that became suffocating. "He never did anything wrong," Linda admitted, "but he made me feel like I could never be good enough. And that, to me, was the hardest thing of all." When Linda finally named Patrick among the 5 colleagues who unsettled her most, it may have been her most difficult choice. She loved and respected him, and she knew fans would resist the idea that anyone could ever dislike Patrick Duffy. But she also knew she had to be honest. His perfection drained me. I always felt compared, always felt I wasn't enough, standing next to a man like that. It wasn't resentment, nor a denial of his talent or his goodness. It was simply the truth that even perfection can cast shadows, and even light can blind. For Linda Gray, Patrick Duffy was living proof of that truth. In the memories of millions of Dallas fans, Patrick Duffy was the face of hope. As Bobby Ewing, he became the very symbol of the golden son, honorable, kind, strong, and endlessly compassionate. If Larry Hagman's JR was the darkness, then Patrick's Bobby was the light. For years, Dallas thrived on that perfect contrast. Viewers adored Bobby because he embodied everything good, while they despised JR for his schemes. But for Linda Gray, her memories of Patrick Duffy were not only filled with admiration, there was also a quiet sense of unease. Patrick was rare, always cheerful, approachable, full of positive energy. On set, he greeted everyone: the director, the cameraman, even the coffee staff. His smile lit up the room, lifting the mood within seconds. Standing beside him, people often felt smaller because Patrick seemed to brighten everything around him. For Linda, that was both a blessing and a burden. "Patrick was too perfect," she once admitted. "So perfect that sometimes I felt invisible. No matter how hard I tried, the audience always chose him to love." Sue Ellen was complex, tormented, filled with contradictions. But when she shared the screen with Bobby, his shining decency often made her flaws stand out more harshly. People compared us. Why was Sue Ellen weak, lost, failing, while Bobby was always strong, always right? His brilliance, even if unintentional, cast a shadow over me, Linda said. One memory remained sharp. In 1985, when Patrick left Dallas and Bobby was killed in a car accident, fans were devastated, and the show itself nearly lost its heartbeat. But just a year later, Patrick returned in one of television's most infamous twists, revealing that an entire season had been nothing but a dream. Viewers rejoiced. The spotlight swung back to Patrick, and he instantly reclaimed center stage. Linda recalled feeling a pang of bitterness. The world had just been waiting for him. Patrick's return erased everything, the stories we'd built, the performances we'd given. All of it was brushed aside just to celebrate Bobby's comeback. The irony was that Patrick never acted arrogant. He was humble, generous, and never caused conflict. Yet his flawlessness itself wore Linda down. If he had been selfish or vain, maybe I could have resented him more easily, she confessed. But no, he was always kind, always perfect, and that made me feel even smaller. Thank you for listening to Linda Gray's late but heartfelt story. These memories are not meant to reopen old wounds, but to help us cherish the journey of a star who gave her all to the art of storytelling. If you once loved Dallas, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support is the most precious gift of all.